The following is a mock debate between Yahweh, the Christian God of the Bible, and a transtheistic, presuppositional apologist who is arguing for the existence of MetaGod. The apologist believes he can prove the existence of MetaGod, who exists as a trans-divine being, who is trans-eternal and trans-spiritual. That is, unlike the Christian God, who exists outside of space and time, in an eternal, spaceless, and timeless existence, MetaGod exists outside of eternal, spaceless timelessness. And unlike God, who exists as a spiritual and mental being, rather than as a material and physical being, MetaGod exists as a trans-spiritual and trans-mental being. The Christian God is arguing against the existence of MetaGod. I'll skip over their opening arguments and jump ahead to where the debate is opened up, and they're allowed to exchange freely. So you don't believe in MetaGod? The apologist asked. No, there's no other God but me, God answered. Well, how do you know that? Questioned the apologist. Because I'm God and I know everything. Do you have any evidence that this MetaGod you're talking about exists? God asked him. Can you prove there isn't a MetaGod? The apologist shot back. You can't prove a negative. The burden of proof is on the one making the positive truth claim, God responded. Well, if you can't prove that there isn't a MetaGod, then you can't deny the possibility that he exists, said the apologist. I created everything that exists. Nothing exists that I didn't create, said God. Did you create yourself? Questioned the apologist. No, I'm eternal, God answered. You claimed that you created everything that exists. You exist. So either you created yourself, or you didn't create everything that exists. Your statement is self-contradictory. So which is it? The apologist asked, with a smug look on his face. I'm eternal. I'm outside of time and space. When I speak of something existing, I'm referring to things that exist within time and space. I created everything that exists within time and space. I am uncreated, so there's no contradiction, God explained. So what you're saying is that you created everything that exists within time and space, but you say you exist outside time and space, and you didn't create yourself. So there exists something outside of time and space which you yourself did not create. Is that correct? Questioned the apologist. Yes, that's correct. I did not create myself. I am uncreated. I'm eternal. I exist outside of time and space, God explained. So you exist in eternity? The apologist asked. Yes, I'm eternal, God replied. So you admit that it's possible for a being which you did not create, you, to exist outside of space and time. If it's possible for one uncreated being to exist in eternity, then how can you deny the possibility of more than one uncreated being to exist in eternity? The apologist demanded. Because I'm all-knowing. If another being like me existed, I would know it. If I didn't, then I wouldn't be all-knowing, said God. Do you know anything that exists outside of your own mind? And how do you know that you're all-knowing? Asked the apologist. I'm God. Nothing exists outside of me. I know that I'm all-knowing because I'm God, explained God impatiently. So you don't know anything that exists outside your mind then? You admit that? Asked the apologist. I admit that nothing exists outside of me. Therefore there is nothing for me to be ignorant of, said God. And when you say that nothing exists outside of you, you mean nothing exists outside of your mind, don't you? You're not a physical being. You don't have a body, do you? So when you say nothing exists outside of me, you mean nothing exists outside your mind, correct? Asked the apologist. That's correct. I'm an eternal spirit. I'm not flesh and blood. I'm an immaterial mind, God clarified. And you claim that you exist outside of time and space, and that you created everything that exists within time and space. So according to you, everything that exists within time and space exists within your mind. So you're all-knowing in the sense that you know everything that exists within time and space. You also know everything that exists within your mind, but you don't know anything that exists outside of your mind. You deny that anything exists outside of your mind, but since you only know what exists inside your mind, how can you prove that nothing exists outside of your mind? The apologist inquired. Again, you're asking me to prove a negative. I have no evidence that anything exists outside of my own mind. Do you have any evidence that anything does exist outside of my mind? God questioned back. But wouldn't you admit that you could be wrong about your belief that nothing exists outside of your own mind? The apologist pressured him. I can't be wrong. I'm God, God asserted. But you said you can't prove a negative. Can you know with absolute certainty that nothing exists outside your mind? The apologist questioned. I am God. I created everything that exists, God insisted. No, that's incorrect. You admitted that you didn't create yourself, because you are eternal and uncreated. So you admit that it is possible for something to exist outside of space and time, which you yourself did not create. And it would be absurd to claim that your own mind exists inside your own mind. Your mind can't exist inside itself. But you believe your mind exists, so not everything that exists inside your mind. And if it's possible for something to exist outside of your mind, and if you don't know anything that exists outside of your own mind, then it's possible that something exists outside of your mind which you don't know, stated the apologist. Hypothetically, yes, it's possible, but there's no evidence to support that claim, God responded. But you can't deny that it is possible. You see, you're no different from the atheist. They can't prove that you don't exist. They can't deny that it's possible for you to exist, but they refuse to believe in your existence without proof. And it's impossible to prove your existence to them because they're material beings who exist within time and space, while you're an immaterial being who exists outside time and space. In the same way, you can't prove that MetaGod doesn't exist. You can't deny that it's possible for him to exist, but you refuse to believe in his existence without proof. And it's impossible to prove his existence to you because you are an immaterial being who exists within the eternal realm, while he is a trans-immaterial being who exists outside of eternity, in the trans-eternal realm, said the apologist with a look of satisfaction. What? God asked with a raised eyebrow. In the same way that a spiritual being like you is invisible to physical beings like humans, MetaGod is invisible to you because he is trans-spiritual. In the same way that finite beings can't comprehend your eternal nature, an infinite being like you can't comprehend MetaGod's trans-eternal nature. You just have to accept it by faith, asserted the apologist. Do you have any evidence to support your claim? Questioned God. Well, without MetaGod, where do you get your standard for absolute morality? The apologist questioned back. I'm God. I am the standard for absolute morality, answered God. Well, then your morality is subjective. If you set your own moral standards, then you're no different from the atheist. Without MetaGod, you have no absolute standard to base your morality on. If you have no absolute standard to base your morality on, then neither do the Christians who use you as their standard for absolute morality. But by your own admission, your morality is subjective because you don't have any source outside yourself to base your morality on. Unless you believe in MetaGod, you have no basis for your own morality. So by what standard do you judge humans and decide who goes to heaven and who goes to hell? Demanded the apologist. I'm God. I created humans, so I get to create the laws they are to live by, asserted God. But unless MetaGod exists to provide you with an absolute standard for what's good and what's not, how can you say that the laws you created are good? It's all just relative. And if there's no MetaGod to give your existence meaning, then your existence is completely meaningless, the apologist claimed. My existence is meaningful because I'm God, said God. That's no different from an atheist saying that his life has meaning just because he's human. But if you didn't exist, human life would be meaningless. Their lives only have meaning because you created them for a purpose. If you hadn't created them for a purpose, they would be just meaningless accidents. Their finite existence only has meaning in the context of the eternal. And in the same way, your eternal existence only has meaning in the context of the trans-eternal. If you just existed for eternity, what would be the point of that? Unless you believe in the trans-eternal, your eternal existence is meaningless. And unless you believe that MetaGod created you for a purpose, then what gives your life purpose? The apologist questioned. Wait a minute. Being eternal means I am uncreated. So how could MetaGod create me? Only that which begins to exist requires a cause. I'm God. I have no beginning or end. That's why I'm the uncaused cause that serves as an explanation for everything which began to exist and therefore requires a cause. So you're contradicting yourself when you say that I, the uncaused cause, had a cause. If I'm eternal, I couldn't have been created. That's absurd, said God with a smirk. You were created with the appearance of being eternal and uncreated, just like you created the universe with the appearance of being billions of years old, even though it's only a little over 6,000 years old. Just like you created the fossils and geological records to give the appearance of evolution and the Big Bang, MetaGod created you with memories of an infinite past and foreknowledge of an infinite future. You created the universe in such a way that all the evidence would lead science-worshipping atheists to the false belief that everything was the result of the Big Bang and evolution, and that you didn't exist. And I know you only did that because you wanted them to believe in you by faith, instead of proving your existence to them, which would take away their free will. MetaGod basically did the same thing. He created you in such a way that if you trust in your own reasoning ability and your own experience of reality, you would be led to the false belief that you're all that exists, and that you're eternal and all-knowing. But if you choose to trust in His trans-eternal wisdom, instead of relying on your own merely eternal reasoning abilities, He will reveal the truth to you by faith, asserted the apologist. That's completely absurd. And you still haven't presented any evidence or logical arguments to prove your claim that MetaGod exists, God said. Well, you've admitted that you don't know anything that exists outside of your mind, so you can't be certain of anything. And unless MetaGod exists, how do you know you can trust your own ability to reason? Unless you accept the truth of MetaGod's existence, you can't know anything at all with absolute certainty, said the apologist. I'm God. I invented reason, logic, and math, God responded. And how do you know your reasoning is valid? If reason, logic, and math are products of your mind, how can you be certain that you can trust them or apply them to what exists outside your mind? The apologist questioned him. Logic, reason, and math are axiomatic and necessarily true. They are absolutes, asserted God. And how do you know that? The apologist questioned. By logic, God answered. So you're using logic and reason to prove logic and reason. That's circular, said the apologist. It isn't circular, it's self-evident, said God. And how do you know that? Retorted the apologist. Do you actually have an argument, or are you just going to keep saying, and how do you know that, over and over? If I give you a justification for my knowledge, you're just going to ask me to justify the justification for my knowledge, and then this whole argument is going to be nothing more than me offering you a justification for the justification for the justification for the justification for an infinite number of justifications for anything I say, God said in frustration. Exactly. You see, unless you admit that MetaGod exists, you have no absolute justification for knowledge, claimed the apologist victoriously. Then neither do you, God shot back. Yes, I do, because I know MetaGod exists, the apologist countered. And how do you know that? God questioned him. Because MetaGod revealed himself to me. You know he exists too. You just deny it because you don't want to have any God before you, claimed the apologist. First of all, no, I don't know that he exists, and neither do you. You haven't given any evidence. You just claimed he revealed himself to you. How? God questioned him. He's MetaGod. Being transomnipotent, he can reveal himself to me in such a way that I can be certain he exists. I know he exists because he revealed himself to me through a YouTube video, answered the apologist. You saw a YouTube video? Is MetaGod on YouTube? Asked God with a raised eyebrow. MetaGod revealed himself to the prophet who calls himself Illuminatus Pythagoras. Illuminatus Pythagoras made a YouTube video about the revelation he received from MetaGod. The YouTube video was transdivinely inspired by MetaGod. And I know that it was transdivinely inspired because the transdivinely inspired video says it was transdivinely inspired. Why is this so hard for you to believe? You yourself revealed yourself to us through ancient books which were revelations from you, which you inspired your prophets to write down, the apologist answered. Yes, I know about the video. I'm God. I know everything that everyone does in the world. But the video was full of contradictions and absurdities. It was so bad, there was a campaign to have it removed, said God. Well, I'm not going to talk about the video with someone who doesn't even believe the video is true, said the apologist, folding his arms across his chest. You're the one who brought the video up. You want to use the video as evidence, but you don't want to discuss the video you're appealing to as the source of your knowledge about MetaGod? I think it's because you know you can't defend all the absurdities and contradictions in it, said God. I believe that video is absolute truth. I'm not going to discuss absolute truth with someone who could be wrong about everything. You claim that it's absurd and contradictory, but if there is no MetaGod, then what's your standard for saying something is absurd? If there is no MetaGod, what's wrong with contradictions? The apologist challenged. Because I'm God, God shot back. How can you know anything? The apologist questioned. Because I'm God, God repeated. And how do you know that's true? The apologist reiterated. Because I'm God, God repeated again. But if there's no MetaGod, how can you know anything with absolute certainty? And if you deny the existence of MetaGod, then why are atheists wrong to deny your existence? Challenged the apologist. I'm the God of the Bible. I created you. Who are you to question me? Without me, you have no basis for knowledge at all. You're not omniscient. I am. By claiming to know something that I don't, you're claiming transomniscience, God accused him. No, I'm not claiming transomniscience. I'm only claiming that MetaGod is transomniscient. And in his transomnipotence, he has the ability to reveal his existence to me in such a way that I can be certain of it. But unless a transomniscient MetaGod exists, how do you justify your own omniscience? Asked the apologist. I know I'm omniscient because I'm omniscient. Being omniscient, I know that I'm omniscient, God asserted. But that begs the question. That's circular reasoning. Your conclusion that you're omniscient rests on the presupposition that you're omniscient. I'm asking you to defend that presupposition. And you can't defend that presupposition without presupposing the conclusion you're trying to prove. So if you can't prove your omniscience, then you can't be certain that you know anything. You can't prove that there isn't anything you don't know that might contradict what you claim you do know. So everything you think you know could be wrong. You can't be certain of anything, the apologist concluded. I can be certain that I exist, God countered. Oh, right, the primacy of existence argument. You think, therefore you are, right? But that's circular. Again, you're presupposing your existence to prove your existence, responded the apologist. No, that's not correct. It's not a circular argument. It's a self-validating argument. In a circular argument, If you can deny the premise, then the conclusion is left unsupported. With the I think therefore I am argument, even the denial of the premise supports the conclusion because the denial that you think is itself a thought. So you end up proving the truth of the presupposition you were attempting to invalidate. So you're just wrong. And your argument against my omniscience could also be used as an argument against MetaGod's transomniscience. How could MetaGod be absolutely certain that nothing exists outside of his transomniscient mind? If you can't be absolutely certain of anything unless I exist, and I can't be absolutely certain of anything unless MetaGod exists, then MetaGod can't be absolutely certain of anything unless a MetaGod exists. You can't have an infinite regress. There has to be an absolute basis for truth. I, God, am that absolute basis, said God, looking very proud of his argument. How do you know that's true? And how could I know that's true? You claim to be, but you could be lying. As a finite being with limited knowledge, it's impossible for me to know whether you're lying or telling the truth about anything. I would have to be omniscient to know whether or not you really are omniscient. To know whether you're good or evil, I would need an objective standard of meta-morality to measure you by. So without MetaGod, I can't know with certainty that you're all-knowing or good in any absolute sense. So without trusting in MetaGod, I can't be certain that I can trust in you, the apologist responded. Well, by your logic, you would need to be transomniscient in order to have certainty that MetaGod is transomniscient, in order to have certainty that I'm omniscient, in order to have certainty that I exist, in order to have certainty that you can trust the validity of your own reasoning. But you have to use your reasoning to reach the conclusion that my existence is a necessary presupposition to support the validity of your own argument for the validity of your argument. That's not a self-evident argument. That is a truly circular argument, exclaimed God. So what would prevent an atheist from using your objection to my argument against a Christian presuppositional apologist who uses the same argument to argue for your existence? The apologist challenged him. Nothing. The presuppositional argument for my existence is completely ridiculous. For that matter, so is the ontological argument, the moral argument, and most of the other arguments Christian apologists use. They're all basically appeals to ignorance. And so is your argument for the existence of MetaGod. It's impossible to prove my existence using reason and evidence. People have to believe I exist based on faith and revelation, God explained. Okay, but as we've established, for someone to trust in your revelation as true, they have to assume that you are good and all-knowing. If you aren't all-knowing, then anything you reveal to them could be false. The only way they could judge whether what you reveal to them is true would be if they themselves were all-knowing. And they can't be absolutely certain that you aren't lying to them unless they know the truth, or if they know that you can't lie. But the only way they have of knowing that you can never lie is your revealed word that claims that you never lie. But that claim could be a lie. So without MetaGod, they could never be absolutely certain. So the only way to know you exist is if you reveal yourself to exist, and the only way to be certain of the truth of your revelation is to know that MetaGod exists. And I know that MetaGod exists because he has revealed his existence to me through a YouTube video, said the apologist. You're committing blasphemy by saying there's a MetaGod, and I send blasphemers to hell, God threatened. Well, then Christian apologists are guilty of blasphemy when they claim to know that you're omniscient, because the only way for them to know with absolute certainty that you're omniscient is if they're omniscient, and the only way that they could be omniscient is if they were God, answered the apologist somewhat nervously. Yes, that's true. Anyone who claims to know for certain that I exist is guilty of blasphemy, just as much as anyone who denies that I exist is guilty of blasphemy. The only people who aren't guilty of blasphemy are the ones who believe I exist based on faith alone without claiming to know for certain that I exist. If you're claiming to know that MetaGod exists, and that on the basis of that knowledge, you know with absolute certainty that I exist, then you're committing blasphemy too. And unless you repent and admit that you don't know whether I exist or not, you're condemning yourself to hell, God threatened. But I do know that you exist, because you're revealing yourself to me right now by even having this debate. So what can I do? Asked the apologist uncomfortably. Yes, that's true, but, like you said, you can't know for certain that you can trust my revelation as true, since there is no MetaGod. Everything I'm telling you could be a lie, and since there is no MetaGod, and since you don't know, you're still just basing everything on faith. I could even just be a hallucination in your mind. My voice could be just an auditory hallucination, so you really don't have any way of knowing with absolute certainty that I exist. You just have to admit that you don't know and accept it by faith, said God. Okay, God, I admit that I don't know you exist, and that my belief in you is based on nothing but pure faith. Please don't send me to hell. But what if MetaGod does exist, even though I can't know that he exists? And what if he's going to send you to trans hell unless you believe in him by faith, even though you have no evidence or reason for his existence? What if you're wrong? Maybe MetaGod will send me to trans hell for not believing in him by faith, and letting you lead me astray from believing in him. And if I try to use my own reason to form my own rational beliefs instead of relying on faith, then you're going to send me to hell for not having faith. So I'm damned no matter what I do. And there's no certainty either way. But I guess it's the same dilemma you face with the question of the existence of MetaGod, though, isn't it? So how do you deal with the uncertainty? Asked the apologist in desperation. Well, I accept my existence as self-evident. I don't concern myself with the question of whether or not there's a meta-reality that exists outside of my experience, because it's impossible to prove that there is. I accept that my experience of reality is reality, because even if it weren't, for me it would be. I accept the validity of logical reasoning and axiomatic self-evident truths, because otherwise knowledge would be impossible. That's not really a problem, though, because if knowledge didn't exist, then there would be no knowledge which I could be ignorant of. And if there were no knowledge which I were ignorant of, then I would be all-knowing. But it's self-evident that I exist, so even if no other knowledge existed, the knowledge that I exist would remain. So knowing myself, I would know everything there is to know with absolute certainty. I know that whatever I experience in my mind exists in my mind. And if nothing exists outside of my mind, then the experiences that exist inside of my mind are all that exist. To prove the experiences in my mind false, it would be necessary to prove the existence of a reality outside of my mind, which can't be proven. So I can trust the validity of my logical reasoning and my perceptions and experiences of reality, God concluded, looking very satisfied with himself for solving an impossible philosophical problem which has baffled human philosophers for thousands of years. But how do you know that to be true with absolute certainty? The apologist questioned timidly. God glared at him and answered, Because go to hell. Because go to hell. That's why.